Once you have all of your pieces of glass foiled together, then you're going to line them up into the pattern that you want. And it's very important throughout the whole stained glass making process to be as exact as possible to the original pattern so that pieces will fit together perfectly. So these pieces right here have some gaps which are going to cause problems, as you'll soon see. So to put them together, put them against one of the corners of the board, and then get some of the nails and a hammer, and you will hammer them in place. This is just enough to keep them from moving when you start soldering. Once you have your pieces in place, you're going to get the flux brush, which looks pretty gross, and the flux, which is this. Now, this is greasy and it helps the solder flow smoothly across the copper foil. So you don't need much, and you'll just spread that right across the copper. After that, you get your soldering iron, which has been heating up for a few minutes. And when you plug in the soldering iron, make sure you plug it into one of these little boxes, because that'll help it from getting too hot and burning the soldering iron out. So to clean the soldering iron, you'll wipe it on a wet sponge, or you can use some wet paper towels. And then you'll get solder, and you'll put the soldering iron on the copper foil, and see this already has solder on it, so it flows pretty smoothly. You can put the solder on top of the soldering iron and it melts immediately, and just drag it across like that. Don't put the solder to the copper directly, because it could get stuck, and if that happens like that, don't pull it off, because you could break your stained glass. Just put the soldering iron back on to melt the solder. So you can go over it a few times depending on how you want it. Good soldering has a thick bump, as you can see, and it cools almost immediately, but the glass will still be a little warm. So if you notice in this piece how there's a hole between the pieces, when I go to solder it, the solder is going to fall through, and I won't be able to make a big nice bump on it. So when I do the other piece, if the gap's too big, the solder either won't fill up completely, or, as you'll see when I flip this over, it'll leak through to the other side a bit, and that'll be a problem when you're soldering it. So once you have it done like that, then you'll put flux on the other side. If you don't use the flux, the solder won't stick to the glass. Now, the solder does have lead in it, so make sure you do this in an open, well-ventilated area. Normally we'll open the windows of the craft center up to do the stained glass. So here's where that hole was. So you just have to keep working at it. Otherwise, you can see right there how it melted through to the other side. Can you see that right there? How it kind of like flattened out. So that's why it's important to make sure the pieces fit together perfectly. Otherwise, if they don't, you can rip up little bits of the copper foil and wedge it between the pieces, and that should help fill up the hole. After you've done that, you can wash off the extra flux, and you have your piece done. And this was the original pattern with all the pieces put together. And you can decide which side of the stained glass you want to be the front and the back. The Craft Center doesn't actually provide the materials, but we have a lot of extra. So right now we have a lot of extra stained glass scraps that are free to use, and we also have extra solder and copper foil. The Craft Center provides the tools and the flux. If you want to buy your own glass, we have a list of some good suppliers. Armstrong Glass Company is an outlet glass supplier, so everything there is discounted.